Hello? All right. Can anybody say it? Charticulator? Charticulator. Is that why everybody's here, right? Yes? Anyway, so we're going to get started with Paul's session. Paul TURLEY, Pragmatic works. He's a pillar at our user group meetings. Really excited to have Paul speak. I think custom visuals have been something that we've been hearing and wanting from all over the marketplace, but building them, not so easy. So what Paul's going to do, he's going to walk through this web app called Charticulator, where you can make your own custom visualizations. No more having to wait for Microsoft to build something. Don't we love that? Yes, we do. Anyway, I'm going to give it to Paul from Down Under. Take it away.
Is it good to be called a pillar? Uh-oh. I'm good, thanks. Yeah, I'll use this. I'll need that. Well, thank you for coming, everyone. We're still in the business day, and that means that you've either played hooky from work or convinced your boss to let you out early. Actually, I see a lot of bosses here, too, so. I guess that's a good thing about being the boss, isn't it? All right, let me just fire this up, and then we will get started. So I came across this tool back in March, and have been playing with it a little bit ever since then. Actually, for the last few weeks, I've been pretty heads down trying to find the edges of this thing, and talking to some other folks who are using Charticulator. Who's had a chance to play with it at all? Okay, so just a couple of you. Anyone have experience actually building custom visuals in PowerBIUG? Nobody. All right. Who is actively using PowerBIUG? Good enough. All right, fantastic. Good. Well, at least you're in the right place. There is free food, so if you did sneak in. This is me. I've been with Pragmatic Works full time since November now. I've had done contract consulting work with Pragmatic. We've been in the industry for about 14 years now. Actually based in Jacksonville, Florida, but have a national presence. I call us a kind of a medium-sized boutique consulting firm specializing in business intelligence. Of course, I work with the fine folks here at CSG Pro. I've been working with Ron and his crew for the last few years, half a dozen years or so, and good folks here as well. So we have a really great community around business intelligence and the Microsoft data platform. So if you need to reach out to me, you're welcome to through these links. I'm actually going to share with you a tiny URL to a OneDrive folder where you can actually download all of the demonstrations that I'm going to be sharing with you today, which includes this deck. So you'll have my contact information if you need to reach out. All right, so I was reminded just at the very, very last minute as I was chatting with Greg and some other folks just over in the corner here about this cartoon image that came to be a week ago, and I need to explain what that was. So Chris Finland, good friend of mine, now running the Microsoft SQL Server Reporting Services product team, which we now call Paginated Reports in PowerBIUG. Chris started this YouTube series with his 10-year-old son Matthew called the Paginated Report Bears. Anybody seen the Paginated Report Bear? Yeah. What? He is famous. He is famous. The first time I saw that, I thought, I don't know. But my good friend Marco Russo actually stepped up and said, I want to do a picture with Paginated Report Bear, and suddenly everybody else wanted to. So, if Marco's going to do it, then everybody else is going to stand in line. So, anyway, Chris showed up at the Business Application Summit last Monday and said, my goal is to get 100 selfies with the Paginated Report Bear, this little stuffed bear that he uses in the videos. And so everybody was doing all of these selfies, and of course I did one. And somehow somebody from Microsoft marketing was watching the Twitter feed and decided to make this cartoon of me holding the paginated report bear. And of course, everybody's retweeting this thing and liking it. So this is my new meme now, is me, the cartoon version of me holding the paginated report bear. So that's where they came from. All right, let's talk about Power BI visuals. So, I remember the very, very early days of what we now call Power BI. And I grew up in the Microsoft data platform around tools like SQL Server, analysis services, and particularly reporting services. And I've been involved in either authoring or co-authoring all of the Roxpress books around reporting services over the past 13, 14 years ago or so. And the genesis of what we call Power BI was a little internal project at Microsoft called Project Gemini, which the first publicly available asset from Project Gemini was PowerPivot in Excel, and then PowerPivot in SharePoint. And that was developed circa 2007, 2008, 2009. It was released as an add-in for Excel in 2010. And after PowerPivot was created, then the folks on the reporting services product team started working on a visualization experience for PowerPivot, or what we were calling, before it was released, it was the Vertipack engine, or the Vertiscan the query engine. So they created this very rich interactive visualization engine before they actually created the visuals themselves. And then they used the technology that was popular at the time, Silverlight, to actually do the visuals. And it was really before HTML5 took hold and became a real strong standard. And so there was this Silverlight thing that they released as an add-in for Excel called PowerBIUG. And kind of semi-supported since things have changed a little bit. But when the PowerBIUG visual experience was finally modernized and turned into HTML5, they put a lot of forethought into making sure that it worked in every browser and that it would be an experience that would work for everybody rather than just someone using Internet Explorer or Edge now in Windows 10. And so they worked very, very hard to build that on modern components and modern technologies, namely HTML5 and a handful of JavaScript libraries like Node.js and D3, et cetera. Well, a lot of us aren't web developers and we don't speak JavaScript, but know that Power BI visuals emit JavaScript and they emit HTML5. In fact, when you're working in Power BI desktop, you're actually working in a web browser. That's why when you author in desktop and publish to the service, the experience is exactly the same thing. It's not an approximation. It's exactly the same thing because it's HTML5 and it's JavaScript. All right? So that's awesome that we have these standard visuals, and you can do a lot with these standard visuals. Well, about 5 years ago, the product team took their code base and they took some of that code, they built an API layer, and they published it, and they documented the API layer, and they said, we're going to put some code out in GitHub, and we're going to let people build their own visuals. We're going to coach you, we'll record videos, we'll support you. We're actually going to encourage the community to build their own custom visuals. And some folks have done that. Folks who know how to do web development, C# programmers, and folks who know their way around JavaScript. Marco and his company have done some of that with their OKViz visuals. I think Daniel is the primary developer who's done most of that, Marco. So there's some really smart people out there who have done some really cool stuff with custom visuals. The problem is that it's not super easy for all of us. So we've had this great gap between the standard visuals and the custom visuals. And I hear from consulting clients pretty regularly who say, hey, we're envisioning this very specific thing that we want to do with Power BI, and we can't figure out how to do it with the standard visuals. So we're thinking we're going to develop a custom visual. How long do you think that'll take? What's it going to cost, and how long will it take? And, the folks that I know who build custom visuals, they spend a few weeks writing code, and they release version 1, and it's a little buggy, and it doesn't work exactly like they want it to, and they get it out there, and they test it, and it's not quite right, so they take a few more weeks to debug and test it some more. So you're talking weeks to months. It's not a super easy thing to do. It's easier than some things, but it's not something that's real trivial. So enter a Microsoft research project called Charticulator, which has been available for several months now in various forms. And I'll tell you a little bit about what Charticulator is. It is an open source project, which means that you can get to the source code, you can branch it, you can extend it if you like, if you're a programmer, you're into that kind of thing. And it gives you all the goodness of custom visuals without all of the work. You are, in fact, building your own custom visual. So you can do a lot of the same stuff with this tool that a programmer would do if they were spinning their own code. And it's built on durable technologies that are based on the API layer that a developer would use. And you use it to create wicked cool visuals. And I'm going to show you some of those visuals, and then I'm going to build a couple of them right here in front of you. So it's built by these folks in Microsoft Research. The first three people there who are the chief architects of this tool all have PhD after their name. And when you talk to them, they sound like they have PhD after their name. They wrote a white paper, and it was submitted to a number of associations. They've won some awards based on this tool. These are really, really, really smart people. They're kind of intellectual types. They're not kind of down here, on the ground with the rest of us, I can tell you by having some conversations. But they do support this, and I've reached out, I've exchanged email with a few of these folks, and they're pretty anxious to support and see this thing used in production. And it's based on a number of JavaScript libraries that you can see here, like TypeScript and D3. All right, well, here are some real quick examples of the kinds of things that you can build with Charticulator. You can build linear charts, just like your standard types of charts, bar charts, column charts, stack charts, cluster charts. All of that stuff you can do actually quite easily. But then we can do some pretty radical stuff as well, like radial charts, spiral charts. You can, I don't know if we'll have time to actually build a Sankey diagram like this one, but I'll show you one that I've built with Charticulator. And then you can tweak it to your heart's content. Change the gaps, the borders, the back colors, all kinds of stuff. All right. So some concepts that are important when working with Charticulator. First of all, when you get started, if you're like me, you'll struggle a little bit with some new ideas. And these are actually objects and structures that do exist at the API layer, so they would actually be familiar to a programmer who has actually done custom visual design. So we have the concept of a glyph, and the glyph is either a shape or an object or a collection of shapes or objects that you're going to bind to data, and you will manipulate sizes, colors, and other attributes of that shape or mark, what we call marks. Could be text, could be a graphic, it could just be a rectangle or an oval, or a collection of these things that we bind to data and then change sizes, shapes, colors, etc. So a mark is the smallest thing that you deal with, and marks can be things like shapes, text, images, like I mentioned. The data axis, I'll show you how that works, and then we have this thing called links, which, if you go back and you look at the Sankey diagram there, you see that you have these rectangles with borders around them, and the height of those rectangles is representative of an aggregate value of some kind. But then you have these kind of flows from one like object to another that shows how the data is related and perhaps how the data travels from one state to another. And that's what we call links. And then we have the concept of a plot segment, which is essentially the foundation upon which we place a glyph, the container again for marks, and that has an x-axis and a y-axis, and it allows us to say, I want to stack these things or stretch them or repeat them or put them in a grid of some kind. We have this concept called scaffolds, and the scaffold is really what the name suggests. It is a framework visually upon which we repeat things. So a scaffold could simply be a horizontal access where we repeat these glyphs over and over again within the framework of the plot segment. Could be horizontal, could be vertical, but then you can also do round things. So we could do a radial. You can say, I want to start here, I want to end here. We could do something like a pie chart where we're essentially saying, let's take this rectangle, but let's start in the middle and let's stretch it so it kind of radiates from the center of a radius. Or we could do a spiral, or you could draw your own. You could take the New York skyline and paint a line, and then your bars would radiate from that. You'll see some examples of that. And then there's kind of a handful of other stuff that are really just properties and attributes of these other objects. So again, I found that as I've kind of struggled with the tool at first, going back and reminding myself what these objects are and how they behave was extremely helpful. So I forgot that this slide builds here. So these are my marks. Marks again could be a shape, it could be text, could be a line, or it could be an image. So you can create your own infographics. This is the data access. And then we have links. Again, I'm going to show you these things, so I won't spend time with it. This is an important concept because when you design a glyph, it's going to be a certain size. And you're going to want to stretch that and be able to mold it. You want things to size proportionally within that plot segment that you're stretching. And so we want to use guides so that we can control the proportions of different objects. And so if you just kind of put stuff out there, you'll find that some objects will kind of shrink and grow as you size the whole thing, and others won't. So for example, a text box wouldn't grow, but a rectangle might grow. And then things end up on top of each other, and it's a big old mess, and that's what we use guides for. So you put things on top of and snap them to these guides, and then when you stretch them, the guides cause all the objects to realign and to remain proportional. And then we have the plot segments, which we'll talk about, scaffolds, and nearly all of the properties and attributes that I've described can be bound to data. And that's the thing that I kind of missed with Power BI, because that's the way things in reporting services work. If I want to change the color based on data, I can do that. If I want to change the size of something based on data, hide and show borders, I can do all of those things, and I'll show you how that can be a very simple drag and drop experience. So this is the checklist for your reference. I'm just going to do this as I start demonstrating and working through this. If you would like to, what was my slide with, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to drop to my last slide just so I can give you my tiny URL. So we called this a workshop, which kind of suggested that you could follow along and do this yourselves. I don't see everybody opening a laptop right now, so I'm going to assume that most of you are not going to be following along. But if you'll go to that tiny URL address at the very bottom, tinyurl.com, Charticulator-demos, that will take you to a OneDrive folder that it will actually be the folder that you'll see that has all the stuff I'm going to be using, which again includes this PowerPoint deck. So I know it's kind of a catch-22. You have to have the address to be able to get to it. So once you have the address, you'll be able to find all of this stuff, which includes the deck, that includes the address. All right, so let me step back, and I'm just going to jump out, and I'm going to build a simple Charticulator chart. A few weeks ago, I got started on a project where our business owner said, over here, I want to have a bar chart with 2 bars on it, and bar 1 is this measure value, and bar 2 is this other measure value. In fact, these were all dynamic measures where we were using a disconnected table to drive slicers, and so we want to say, the top one is actuals right now, and then the bottom one will be forecast. And then with a different dynamic view, the top one is going to be year-to-date actuals, and the bottom one is going to be target. And so, we had all of these different scenarios driven by a slicer. But kind of the whole basis of this thing is that I need a bar chart that has 2 bars, and each of those 2 bars is driven by a different measure. guess what? You can't do that with Power BI. And so what I ended up doing is I created 2 stacked bar charts, and I created a third measure that was the maximum of the 2 values, and then I had to go do some math and figure out which of the 2 was bigger and come up with the difference. And then I did a stack bar, and I made the last bar white on a white background so that you couldn't tell that it was stacked. That was kind of a Brian Grant trick. And but the point was that, yeah, there was a way to get there, but it wasn't using the tool exactly the way it was designed. You had to be tricky with it. So I thought, well, maybe I can use Charticulator to do that. So that's going to be my first trick. So the first thing that I'm going to do is it occurred to me that I have 3 different versions of Power BI installed, and I recently updated the Power BI report server version of Power BI Desktop, and that happens to be my default installation now, which means when I double-click on a PBIX file, it opens with an older version of Power BI. Thank you, product team, for making that so easy. So now I'm going to open the June version of Power BI Desktop, and then I'll open my file, which had been saved previously with the June version of Power BI Desktop. Has anyone else done that? Robin has, and this guy has. All right. So, yeah, if you're developing for both on-prem and in the cloud, you have to have those 2 different versions of desktop installed. And then if you happen to be running Windows 10 and you installed the MSI package, then you might have 3 versions installed like I do. All right, so we'll just go ahead and open that up since it's on the most recent list. This is the June edition. How can you tell that this is the June edition? It's not dark anymore. Yes, it's glaring bright. All right. And then it says, wait, it's saved with no, it wasn't. Just disregard that message. All right. Well, the first thing that I'm going to do is I need to prepare a set of data to use in Charticulator to design my charts with. Because Charticulator is just a cloud-based tool that you use in the browser, it does not have the Power BI engine behind it. And so we have to feed it CSV files that are exactly in the right shape to design against. And then you can go ahead and use the visuals that you create and bind them to your own data. And of course, you will have the Power BI engine behind them at that point. You actually have to go manufacture some data. So the easiest way to do that is to just drop your data into a table. So I just rebooted. I'm going to do that. So you can see that I've just created a table down here with 2 measures. Again, this is going to be a really, really simple example. So I'm going to copy that table. I'm going to plop it over on another page. I do have to have some slicers over here in order for my data to behave the way that I want it to. And so I just deleted that page, didn't I? Let me go back and duplicate that page one more time with my slicers on it. And then let's remove what I don't need. And I found in the June desktop version, you can't select a visual and then press the delete key. You actually have to remove it. I'm not quite sure why that is. Now, I'm going to end up converting this to my bar chart, so I'm just going to make it as big as I imagine that bar chart might be. But you can just see that I've got 2 measure values in there. That's all that is, not anything real impressive. So I'm going to use the ellipsis, and I'm going to export that data out to a CSV file. Now, I've already done that. I have it sitting in a folder waiting. So I'm just going to jump over here to Charticulator, and let me just start with charticulator.com, not in the app. All right, so this is the Charticulator site. It's very simple. You can go to the gallery, you can see some examples, there's some videos, but I'm just going to launch Charticulator. Like I said, this is just a browser-based application, and we're going to go point to that text file, which is that guy right there. It's the one that I exported. There's a quick preview, and I'll say done. All right. This is my glyph editor this is my plot segment editor. I'm going to zoom the glyph editor out so that I get the natural guides. Now let's just think about this a little bit. I want a bar, which is a rectangle. I want a gap between the two bars and then a second bar. And then I need a data access to be able to correlate the values between those two bars. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to put a vertical guide on here. You can drag and drop, but you end up with kind of this arbitrarily shaped and placed thing. So what I will do is just click on the vertical guide icon and then draw my guide. And then down here you can see that it has 4 snap points on that guide, which is exactly what I wanted. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw 2 rectangles. So I'll draw that rectangle, and then I'll draw this rectangle. Now, you can actually undock these windows. So if you want a little bit of room, like in the case where you're demonstrating to a large audience who may not be able to see everything on your screen, then I can just make that a little bit bigger, and then I can get that to be the right size. And the next thing that I want to do is I want to put a data access on here. So that's my data access right there. And I'm just going to put that right on the bottom. Now, it does intersect with the bottom of my rectangle, so it's a little hard to see it right now. But you'll see that I have a standard properties window over here. It's a lot like Visual Studio. And I can use this to set various properties. Well, the first thing that I need to do, and I'm actually going to resize this rectangle just so you can see that I have that data access sitting down there on the bottom. I'll select the data access. I can also select it over here. And I'm going to drag and drop each of my 2 fields onto my data access. When I do that, I get these little snapping points, and it'll go and make up a scale for me. Now, by default, it's going to be a scale from the min to the max. That's not what I want, but I'll work with the tool for the time being. So you can see it's from the min to the max. But with that data access selected, if I go back and just change the range value from 0 to, let's say, something a little bit bigger than that max value, like 50,000, there you can see that I've got my 2 little placeholder dots right where I want them. So this first rectangle, I'm going to resize, and you can see that it will snap to one of those field placeholders. And I'll do the same thing with this one. Just snap it to the quantity prior year field. Now, I don't want to see this data access, so I'm going to choose it. And I'm just going to say that I don't want it to be visible. And I'll go ahead and resize that rectangle back to where it was. And I just want to change the color. One thing I have found with the colors is that I don't get the ability to use the standard Power BI theme colors with these shapes. However, you can bind them to fields. So if you want to pass colors in as measures or field values, you can do that. But I haven't found a way to kind of make them just naturally change theme colors. That's something we might see in the future. So I'm just going to change these to some colors that I like. Let's just make them blue and purple. And now I want to put some data labels on them. And the way that we do that is we add a text mark. Now, if I click on the text, you'll see that I get this little crosshairs, and what you probably can't see there very well is there's a little green dot that kind of goes wherever it wants to. And if I guess it's a blue dot. So if I drop that right on the right edge of this rectangle, I'm going to get this little text box. That means that that's its anchor point. I'm going to move the text box over here. It's a little small right now, and I'm going to change that. But I'm going to add another one first. That means that text is going to travel with the right edge of that rectangle, with that bar. It'll always be anchored so that it sits to the left of that bar. And the only problem is if I have a really, really, really skinny value, then the text might end up way over here. But it's going to do exactly what I told it to do. Now I'm going to go to my text, and I'm just going to bump up the size. Let's just bump that up to 18 point. Keep in mind that even though I am using a point value, that when this thing scales, it's going to make the text larger or smaller. So it's not always going to be 18 points. The tool, actually the framework behind the custom visuals are smart enough to resize things, which means that it may not do exactly what I ask it to do. It's going to try to be a little smarter than I am. And I do want this text to be white on that dark background, so I'll do that. I'll just change the color. And you'll also notice here that by default it is right justified. So it was smart enough to justify the text based on where I put that anchor point. Let's add 2 more text marks. And these will be for some static text that I'll put out here. I'm going to make that text a little bit larger than the other text. All right, so let's bump this up to, I don't know, 20 points. All right, so if we go ahead and dock the glyph editor back, you'll see that it has placed a glyph onto the plot segment. Now, this particular chart is not going to get repeated on the X or the Y axis like we would normally do with grouped and repeating values, because this is a simpler visual than a lot that I might create. And so my glyph just ends up being the whole size of the plot segment. And I'm almost done at this point. Now, I want to make a little room for my labels. In fact, I don't like that title up at the top. I'll just get rid of that text marker, and I'll just resize all of my margins so everything just takes up as much of the available space as possible. I now have a nearly completed chart. Just realized I haven't bound these text values yet. So let's go back to the glyph editor, and I can either select these text markers right here, or I can just go down into the tree and select text 1 and text 2. And I want to have the actual value of my field. So to do that, all I need to do, and I'm going to undock this again just so you can see the properties down here, give us a little more room. And I want you to watch that as I have text 1 selected, when I drag and drop the quantity sum field, that all of the blue stuff, all of those wells that lit up are bindable. I can bind fields to every one of those properties. I'll call them properties. I think the people in the JavaScript world call them attributes. But I can dynamically change my font size, my font weight, the name of the font, the colors, etc., binding those to fields. So I just want to change the text itself. And you can change the formatting, but again, you have to kind of think in JavaScript when you do that. And then I'm going to choose text 2, drag and drop, put that here in the text. And if we would have had this wide enough, you would have seen that we actually have values there now. Okay, now I have a working visual. I'm going to go ahead and plop that back. At this point, if I just click on the floppy disk, it'll ask me for a name, and it saves it into the cloud. And so the next time you log in, by the way, it uses a Microsoft account, just like all the other Microsoft stuff that you're used to using. And it's always going to be there. You can download these files, but by default, we just keep them up in the cloud within the Charticulator tool. All right. So I found out the hard way that you want your chart names, you don't want names or spaces in your names. If you have spaces in the names, you'll get some really weird errors when you import them into PowerBIUG. And so just make a point not to do that. So you can see that by default, it actually took my CSV file name. But I'm just going to change this to 2 measure bar chart. You can tell I've practiced this a little bit because I'm now up to 6. So just put your name right there. And I'm going to save that to my charts. Okay, so that's saved. So if something blew up, my machine melted down, it would be there the next time I use Charticulator. The next thing that I want to do is I want to export this as a custom visual. So when I choose export, you can see I can export it to an image. I can just create a web page out of it or a template to pick up and use at another time, or I can create my visual as we go. The thing to know here is that all of these settings aren't persisted anywhere. So if I create version 1, I go test it, and I want to tweak something, I go and tweak it, you're going to have to set these things again. And that's probably something that will probably change as this matures. But it's a minor hindrance, and it gives me more typing practice. So in the field well, in Power BI, when I use this visual, I don't want the field well to be called quantity sum. That was the name of my measure. I want it to be called value 1. All right, same thing for my second measure. We'll call that value 2. I don't want the axis scale, the x-axis, to start at the min value. I always want it to start at 0. So I'm going to uncheck that box. Text 3, that was the text over on the left side of the first bar. I want that to be called value 1 label and value 2 label. Everything else I'll leave as is. Those are all properties that I can set within the paint roller. I do want a tooltip. I do want to give my visual a name, and I'm just going to repeat the chart name now. And then I'll put my name in there as the author, which is going to be metadata available within the component, and my email address, etc. And I'm going to go ahead and there you can see that it was downloaded, it was exported. Now what just happened is Charticulator just went and wrote about 1,000 lines of JavaScript. I mean, it was a whole bunch of code. And it just built this PBI viz file that contains all of this JavaScript and all of the metadata that Power BI expects from any custom visual. There is nothing in there that says this was generated with Charticulator. It's just a custom visual. So I'm going to go, at this point, what I would typically do is I would go to my downloads folder, because I'm using Chrome that only drops to the downloads folder. If I were using Edge or IE, then I could have said save as and moved it into whatever folder I wanted. But it's sitting right there in my downloads folder. So we'll just cut that, and we'll go put that in the Charticulator demos. You can see I've got a folder full of these exported visuals. It's right there. I'm going to jump over to Power BI, and you can see that I've imported a bunch of these. We don't yet have the ability to set a custom icon. And there's a place within the metadata, if you unzip the PBI viz file, if you create an assets folder, you're supposed to be able to drop an icon.png file in there, but I haven't found that it works. So, you know, when I figure that out, I'll blog about it, but so far I haven't seen that anybody else has figured out how to make that work either. So right now we just have a whole bunch of the same icons. So just like any other custom visual, I click the ellipsis, I say import from file, and I'll go pick, I thought we were at 6. Where did I, yeah, okay. 2 measure bar. Hey. Okay. All right. So now there's just one tiny little caveat. Now you'll see that data set is incomplete. So if you go over here and you look at the field wells, you'll see that there's a required field well where we have to set the granularity. And you know, you think, well, yeah, but this isn't a visual that required any grouping. Why do I need to set the granularity? Because this is a general use tool that needs to support at least one, but perhaps multiple levels of granularity. And so we needed to have a place to do that. So I have to group this on something. I happened to be selecting my calendar year. So let's just group on the calendar year. So I'll go grab the order date calendar year and drag that into the granularity. And when I zoom out, voila, there it is, a working custom visual. You can clap now if you like. So, but I have these 2 labels sitting out here that just say text. That's not very helpful. Well, if we go to the paint roller, you'll see that I have a bunch of custom stuff. So under the Charticulator group, you'll see that there is a value 1 label. Thank you. And so I can say, all right, well, this is my quantity, misspelled. All right, and this is my prior year quantity right there. And just like magic. All right, so you kind of see the basic building blocks. Not a super impressive visual by any means, but now you understand how to use guides, you understand how to use marks within a glyph, you understand how to do the data binding, and that's the foundation for a lot of other cooler stuff. So let me actually take you to some completed visuals, and I'll kind of walk you through the process quickly just to show you how I would have built them. So since I've saved all of these charts up here in the service, when I go to open, you can see all of the stuff that I've already built. And let's go down and take a look at the sand key. So the way that the sand key was built, and I think if I had more time to prepare this, and knowing that I had kind of a short presentation time, I think what I would do is actually have like 3 different copies, and I would show them to you in stages. But just imagine, if you would, that if I were to go back a few levels of undo, that I would just create a stacked bar chart. And all that is, in fact, I'll tell you what I will do, is I will just get to that point. Let me just do a new, and we'll do this, and we'll do a sand key data. All right, so I'm just going to drop a rectangle mark, and we'll say the height of this thing is my quantity, and the color of that thing is my category. All right, poof, I get a bar, or I get a column chart. And now I'm going to arrange my column chart like this, and I'm going to group it like that. All right, now I have a stacked column chart. That literally took me 30 seconds to create a stacked column chart. And now I'm going to grab one of my marks, and I'm going to say I would like to link that using a band type link on the category name and create the link. All right? And I also want to change the gaps, and I'd like them to look a little fancier than that. And so I'm going to go down and say that I want my links to be linked using a Bezier curve rather than a line. And I love the name of this property, the curveness. We're going to change the curveness to something that's a little too radical. Okay, so a funky Bezier curve, not too funky, but I mean, boom, you know, it's just about done. I just have some cosmetic changes to make now. So, you know, let me go take you to the cooking show demo where I've added the text marks, bound them to fields, changed my background color and foreground colors, changed my margins. I do the export thing just like I did before, and then I can go drop that into a report page and bind it. And it really is that easy. The next one that I'll show you is a radial chart. So we'll come back. So this actually started as a column chart. So it was a stacked column chart, much like the sand key did. But all you need to do at this point is I add a different scaffold. So it sits on a horizontal scaffold by default. And you know, I could flip it. I could just grab a vertical line scaffold and drop that on here, and that would actually just take my column chart and turn it into a bar chart. But by dragging a radial scaffold onto effectively that column chart, it makes this wheel for me. And at that point, I can say, all right, I want my minimum value to be, 20%, which I think this is something close. If you, heaven forbid, wanted to make your own pie chart, you would simply create a very simple column chart, use a radial scaffold, and then set the inner radius, which you can see is 0.25 right there. I would set that to 0, and that effectively would just make a pie chart. And so this radial chart shows month by month, January to December, my relative monthly category quantity values with these links between them. And so you can kind of layer these things on top of themselves. Once you've actually created a chart, you can actually take that entire chart and you can drop that into a scaffold and repeat it, which then gives us multiples, which is probably one of the most asked for things within Power BI out of the box that we don't yet have today. The argument that I keep making with the product team is Tableau does that. But no, I'm sorry, Salesforce Analytics does that. But anyway, let me just pause here. I'm going to drop back to my presentation, and let's just catch up a little bit. So, something simple. The two-measure chart, again, the concept of marks within a glyph. The glyph is kind of this binding unit that I place into a plot segment, and then that allows me to control things like repeating, grouping, and scaffolding. So you saw me do that, you saw me do that, and we did that. All right, so imagine the possibilities of just extending those same basic concepts. So on the left side, and this is one that I created, had to futz around with this a little bit to figure out what kinds of shapes and lines to use, whether I use a bar, make it invisible, and just show the rightmost border, or actually I could do it with a line. Finally figured out how to do this with a line to be able to do bullet graphs where the line marks were the targets and then the rectangles were the actual values. Pretty simple stuff. Once you figure that out, then you can repeat that and put it into a matrix like this and be able to do multiples with it. So, just imagine the layers that you can put on these things after you've assembled the basic building blocks. All right, now for something completely different. So the kinds of things that we can do now, building on top of these very basic chart concepts, are radial charts. The small radial chart you see there on the left side, that one, I have a version of that I spent 2 or 3 hours playing with, and it was a lot of work just to get it to do what I needed it to do. This probably took somebody quite a bit of time just tweaking to get this to work the way I wanted it to. The spiral chart there, spiral is just one of the scaffolds that you can use. What's the business purpose in that? For dates, it might make sense, but it looks cool. But you can see various examples of essentially the same data on different scaffolds. A radial scaffold with links, they're just line links with Bezier curves between them. Here's a horizontal scaffold with exactly the same data with curved links, and then a custom scaffold where you actually use the pencil and you draw a line, and then it will align to that. And then that's the chart that I just showed you. So with that, why don't we just pause for questions, and then that'll take us to the formal end of the presentation. What questions do you have? Yep. Sorry. And then there's a gentleman in the middle right after you're done. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask on those numerical values, you said they cannot be formatted?
Oh, they certainly can be formatted, yes. It's just that the format string is defined by a JavaScript standard, which I'm less familiar with. but you just have to go look up how to format them. But yeah, you can certainly format them. It was setting the colors to work with the standard Power BI themes that you either can't do, or I just haven't found an example of where you can do it. Back here.
Yeah, are these custom visuals bound to your initial data set, or can you use them across PBIX files for different data sets?
You can use it with anything you want. The reason that when I exported the custom visual, I changed, I forget what they called it. They have a funny name for defining the name of the field wells. You want to give those generic names. So when you plop that onto your own Power BI page, you're just going to drag and drop your own fields in here onto those field wells that you've defined. You can use it with any data that you want, as long as it works with the way you design the custom visual.
Anybody else? Yes.
You need to get some exercise, Greg.
All right, here we go.
So far, have you found there are things that you can do that you can't do in Charticulator that you could do using the API and coding it?
I'm sure that there are. I'll admit that I understand some of the basic tenets of the custom visual API, having played with it a little bit and worked with developers who are much more skilled at coding than I am. I'm sure that there are things that you can do at a much more finite level with the API. Honestly, I'm kind of a hack with Charticulator. I've really been kind of working with it in trial and error. There's very little documentation on this tool, which means that I have no idea if it can do things that I haven't seen yet. So I'm not equipped to answer that question beyond that. But this is a utility. It's a tool that does some impressive things, but I'm sure that you can do things with the API that it can't do.
Anybody else? Yes. We'll do this last question.
On average, how many times do you have to re-export a custom visual before you get it to
Well,
where
that's a
you
good
want it?
question. Well, let's see. When I got started, a month and a half ago, 10. I've been practicing the 2-measure bar now, to the point where I can do that in my sleep without any trial and error. So it depends on the complexity of the visual, but I think once you get good at it, a couple times. Which can be a little frustrating because it doesn't remember any of those settings. So you go throw them out in Notepad++ and copy and paste, or just make sure you remember what you called the fields, and you'll get good at typing your name and your email address over and over again. So, all right. Well, with that, I think we're just about out of time. So I really appreciate your attention and coming out to watch. And I'll go ahead and put the last slide up just so you have the resources, but the most important one is the URL at the bottom. So just go to that OneDrive folder and download this presentation, and then you're welcome to pull anything else down as well.
We'll have your slide deck also up on the PowerBIUG website.
Sounds good. All right, thank you.
Let's give Paul a hand.